Kenneth Creed wiped the grease from his hands with a shop rag, the scent of motor oil clinging to his clothes like a second skin. The auto shop fell quiet as the last customer drove away, tail lights disappearing into the Montana winter dusk. Snow crunched under his boots as he locked up, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. 6 months. That's how long Mary had been in their lives, and that's how long Sandra had been slipping away from him. The drive home through Marrow Creek took 8 minutes on clear roads, 12 when snow fell heavy like tonight. Kenneth knew every pothole, every curve of these streets. He'd grown up here, left for the army, and came back to build something solid, something lasting. The house sat dark except for one window. Kitchen light. Sandra would be in there, probably staring at her phone again. Kenneth pushed through the front door, shaking snow from his jacket. The house felt cold despite the heater running. Not temperature cold, something deeper. Sandra, in here. Her voice came flat from the kitchen, but he found her at the table, coffee mug half empty, phone face down beside her hand. She looked up when he entered, but her eyes seemed to focus somewhere past his shoulder. "How was work?" she asked. "Same as always. Fixed Mrs. Patterson's transmission. Order parts for the Miller truck." Kenneth hung his jacket on the chair. "Where's Mary?" "Sleeping." "She eat okay?" "Yes, Kenneth. She ate." He studied his wife's face. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She'd been beautiful on their wedding day 3 years ago. Still was when she smiled. Problem was, she barely smiled anymore. "You seem tired," he said. Sandra shrugged. 6-month-old baby. "What do you expect? Maybe I should take the night shift more often." "You work 10 hours a day." "So do you. Being a mom is work." "Is it?" Sandra's fingers drummed against the table. "Feels more like being trapped." Kenneth felt something cold settle in his chest. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." Sandra stood, leaving her mug on the table. "I'm going to check on Mary." She brushed past him, and Kenneth caught a scent that wasn't baby powder or her usual perfume. Something sharper, unfamiliar. He followed her down the hall to Mary's room. Their daughter lay in her crib, tiny fists curled near her face, breathing soft and steady. 6 months old, and already she had Sandra's dark hair, his stubborn chin. "She's perfect," Kenneth whispered. Sandra stood at the window, looking out at the falling snow. "Sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if what? Nothing." But Kenneth heard the unfinished thought hanging in the air like a threat. Later that night, after Sandra had gone to bed claiming exhaustion, Kenneth sat in his recliner with a beer and tried to make sense of the pieces that didn't fit. Sandra's mood swings had gotten worse since Mary's birth. The doctor said postpartum depression was common, suggested counseling. Sandra refused. Then there were her trips to Bozeman. Visiting her mother, she said. But last week, Kenneth had called Sandra's mother to ask about Mary's vaccination schedule, and the woman seemed confused. "Sandra hasn't been by in months," she'd said. "Is everything all right?" Kenneth had played it off, made excuses. But the doubt planted itself deep. His phone buzzed. Text message from his sister Marla. "How are you holding up? You look stressed at Sunday dinner." Kenneth typed back, "Just tired. Work stuff." But that wasn't true. Work was the easy part. Work made sense. Tools did what they were supposed to do. Parts fit where they belonged. People were harder to figure out. He checked on Mary one more time before bed. She slept peacefully, unaware of the storm clouds gathering around her small world. Kenneth didn't know it yet, but this would be one of the last peaceful nights in their house. 3 days later, Kenneth worked late on a stubborn brake job. The Hendricks pickup fought him every step, like the truck itself didn't want to be fixed. By the time he finished, darkness had settled over Marrow Creek like a heavy blanket. The house sat quiet when he pulled into the driveway. Sandra's car was gone. Again, Kenneth frowned, checking his phone. No messages. He tried calling her, got voicemail. "Sandra, it's me. Just wondering where you are. Call me back." Inside, the house felt different. Too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping baby, but the hollow quiet of emptiness. "Sandra," he called out. No answer. Kenneth walked to Mary's room, expecting to find her in the crib. The room was dark, the crib empty. His heart jumped. Sandra. Maybe she'd taken Mary with her. That made sense. But Sandra never took Mary on her Bozeman trips. Said the drive was too long for a baby. Kenneth searched the house room by room, calling their names. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom all empty. He checked the garage last, pushing through the door from the kitchen. The garage light was on. That was wrong. They always turned off the garage light. Sandra was paranoid about the electric bill. Kenneth stepped into the garage, scanning the space. His workbench, shelves of old paint cans, Christmas decorations in plastic bins. Everything looked normal except the deep freezer in the corner. The one they'd bought last year for storing venison after hunting season. The lid was closed, but something made Kenneth walk toward it without a sound. Faint, like his blood turned to ice water. Kenneth ripped open the freezer lid and saw his daughter inside, lying on her side among frozen packages of meat. Mary's lips were blue, her tiny body rigid and still. But her chest moved. Barely. Jesus Christ. Kenneth scooped Mary from the freezer, her body cold as stone against his chest. Mary, baby, stay with me. He ran to the house, grabbing the phone with one hand while holding Mary against his jacket with the other. His fingers shook as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My baby, my 6-month-old daughter. I found her in a freezer. She's barely breathing. Sir, what's your location? Kenneth gave the address, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his throat. Army training kicked in. Stay calm. Follow procedure. Get the job done. Is the child conscious? No. She's cold. Really cold. Her lips are blue. I'm dispatching an ambulance. Is she breathing? Kenneth held his ear near Mary's face. Felt the faintest whisper of air. Yes. Barely. I need you to warm her gradually. Skin-to-skin contact. Don't use direct heat. Kenneth pulled off his shirt and pressed Mary against his chest, wrapping them both in a blanket from the couch. Her skin felt like ice. How long was she in the freezer? That was the question that made Kenneth's world tilt sideways. How long? He'd left for work at 7 that morning. It was now past 9 at night. 14 hours? But Sandra had been here. Sandra was supposed to be watching Mary. I don't know, Kenneth said. I just got home from work. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. Kenneth watched them work on Mary, checking her temperature, her pulse, her breathing. One of them, a young woman with efficient hands, looked up at Kenneth with serious eyes. Her core temperature is dangerously low. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. At the hospital, Kenneth paced the waiting room while doctors worked on Mary. The nurse asked questions he couldn't answer. How long had Mary been in the freezer? Why was she in there? Where was her mother? Dr. Martinez, a pediatric specialist, finally came out with news. Your daughter is stable. We're warming her slowly and monitoring for complications. She was hypothermic, but we caught it in time. How long was she? Based on her core temperature and the severity of hypothermia, I'd estimate between 45 minutes and an hour. Any longer, and we'd be having a different conversation. An hour. Mary had been dying slowly in that freezer for an hour. Doctor, could this have been an accident? Dr. Martinez studied Kenneth's face. Mr. Creed, I have to ask, how did your daughter end up in a freezer? I don't know. I came home from work and found her there. Where is your wife? I don't know that either. Kenneth's phone rang. Sandra. Kenneth? I just got your messages. What happened? Where are you? Bozeman. I told you I was visiting Mom. Why do you sound upset? Kenneth walked away from the nurse's station, lowering his voice. Mary's in hospital. What? What happened? I found her in the freezer. Silence on the other end. Then, that's impossible. Come home. Now. I'm 2 hours away. Kenneth, what do you mean you found her in the freezer? Just come home, Sandra. Kenneth hung up and stared at the phone. Sandra's voice had sounded wrong. Not shocked enough. Not panicked enough for a mother hearing her baby almost died that he called his sister Marla. Kenneth? It's late. What's wrong? Mary's in hospital. Someone put her in our deep freezer. Jesus. Is she okay? She will be. Marla, I need you to come here. I'm on my way. Marla arrived before Sandra did. She found Kenneth in the hospital room, holding Mary's hand through the crib rails. Mary was awake now, looking around with curious eyes, monitors beeping steadily. She looks good, Marla said, smoothing Mary's hair. Alert. Doctor says no permanent damage. We got lucky. Kenneth, what happened? He told her everything. Coming home to the empty house. Finding Mary in the freezer. Sandra's phone call. Marla listened without interrupting, her nurse training making her ask the right questions. How long since Sandra left this morning? I don't know. She was still sleeping when I left for work. And the garage light was on? Yes. You always turn that light off. Always. Marla was quiet for a long moment. Kenneth, babies don't crawl into freezers. I know. Someone put Mary in there. I know. Sandra arrived at midnight, rushing into the hospital room with tears streaming down her face. She looked genuinely distraught, reaching for Mary with shaking hands. Oh God, baby. Mommy's here. Mommy's here. Kenneth watched his wife's performance, studying every gesture, every expression. Sandra sobbed over the crib, touching Mary's face, whispering apologies. I don't understand how this happened, Sandra said. I checked on her before I left. She was sleeping in her crib. When did you leave? Kenneth asked. Around 10. Maybe 10:30. You told me you were visiting your mother. I am. I was driving there when you called. Sandra's story felt rehearsed. Too smooth for someone who just learned their baby almost died. Doctor Martinez came in to check on Mary, explaining the treatment plan, the signs to watch for. Sandra asked all the right questions, played the concerned mother perfectly. But Kenneth noticed something. When the doctor explained how long Mary had been in the freezer, Sandra's reaction was relief, not horror. She'll be okay, though? Sandra asked. No permanent damage. I told you she'd be okay, Sandra said to Kenneth later. When the doctor had left, Kenneth went very still. What did you say? I said she'll be okay. No, you said you told me she'd be okay. Sandra blinked. I was saying she'll be okay. Sandra, I never told you Mary was alive when I called. I just said she was in the hospital. The color drained from Sandra's face. Of course I knew she was alive. You wouldn't be this calm if she was. How did you know? Sandra stared at him, trapped by her own words. Kenneth, you're scaring me. I'm tired and confused. I just want our baby to be safe. But the damage was done. Sandra had revealed knowledge she shouldn't have. And Kenneth filed that fact away like evidence in a case he was building against someone he'd once loved. Mary came home from the hospital 2 days later, healthy and happy as if nothing had happened. Kenneth took time off work to help with her care, but mostly he wanted to watch. Sandra played the devoted mother perfectly. She fed Mary, changed her diapers, sang soft lullabies. To any observer, she looked like a woman grateful for her child's safety. But Kenneth was looking closer now. Sandra's phone rang constantly. She always stepped into another room to answer, speaking in hushed tones. When Kenneth asked who called, she'd say work or her mother or a friend from college. Since when you talk to friends from college? Kenneth asked after the third mysterious call in one afternoon. People reach out when they hear about emergencies. Word travels. What word? We haven't told anyone what happened. Sandra's eyes flicked away. Marla must have said something, but Kenneth had specifically asked Marla to keep quiet until they understood what happened. His sister was discreet. She wouldn't gossip about family business. That evening, while Sandra gave Mary a bath, Kenneth examined the garage more carefully. He'd been too panicked the night he found Mary to look for clues. Now he searched like the investigator he'd been trained to be in the Army. The deep freezer sat in the corner, humming quietly. Kenneth opened it, looking inside with different eyes. Packages of venison were stacked neatly on one side. There would have been just enough room for a small body on the other side. He checked the lid. No scratches, no signs of struggle. Mary had been placed inside, not thrown. Kenneth examined the garage door opener, a smart device connected to their Wi-Fi. Sandra's phone could control it. So could his. The device logged every opening and closing with a timestamp. Kenneth pulled up the app on his phone and scrolled through the recent activity. His hands grew cold as he read the data. Garage door opened. 2:14 a.m., 3 nights ago. Garage door closed. 2:31 a.m. Garage door opened. 6:47 a.m. Garage door closed. 6:52 a.m. Kenneth left for work at 7. He always pulled his truck out and closed the garage behind him, which matched the 6:47 opening. But the middle of the night activity was new. Someone had opened the garage at 2:14 a.m. and closed it 17 minutes later. Then opened it again at 6:47. Sandra claimed she'd left for Bozeman around 10 in the morning. But the garage logs showed activity in the early morning hours when she should have been sleeping. Kenneth took screenshots of the logs and saved them to his phone. Next, he checked the baby monitor. It was a smart device, too, with a camera that recorded to the cloud. Kenneth accessed the recordings from that night, but found nothing. The camera had been disabled. Not broken. Disabled. Someone had turned it off deliberately. Kenneth felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together, forming a picture he didn't want to see. That night at dinner, Sandra seemed nervous. She kept glancing at Kenneth, started conversations, and letting them die. "I've been thinking," she said, feeding Mary from a small jar of baby food. "Maybe we should get a security system. After what happened." "What kind of security system?" "Cameras. Motion sensors. Something to make sure Mary's safe when we're sleeping." Kenneth studied his wife's face. "You think someone broke in?" "I don't know what else to think. Mary didn't put herself in that freezer." "No," Kenneth agreed. "She didn't. It scares me to think someone was in our house. Someone who wanted to hurt our baby." Sandra's performance was good. Concerned mother, worried about security. But Kenneth heard something else in her voice. She was probing, trying to figure out what he knew. "I already ordered cameras," Kenneth said. Sandra went very still. "You did?" "3 of them. Front door, garage, and living room. They should arrive tomorrow." "That was fast." "I don't waste time when it comes to Mary's safety." Sandra nodded, but Kenneth saw worry in her eyes. She didn't want cameras, which meant she had something to hide. Over the next few days, Kenneth installed the security cameras while Sandra watched nervously. He made a show of explaining how they worked, how they uploaded recordings to the cloud, how he could monitor them from his phone. "Even when I'm at work, I'll be able to see everything that happens in this house," Kenneth said. Sandra forced a smile. "That's good. I'll feel safer." But she didn't look safer. She looked trapped. Kenneth also made other preparations. He contacted a lawyer not to file for divorce, but to understand his rights regarding child custody. He researched domestic surveillance laws in Montana. He read about evidence requirements for criminal cases that he was building a case, piece by piece, against his own wife. The hardest part was acting normal. Kissing Sandra goodbye in the morning. Making small talk over dinner. Pretending he still trusted her with their daughter. But Kenneth was good at maintaining cover. The Army had taught him patience, discipline, and how to gather intelligence without revealing his mission. Sandra, meanwhile, grew more careless. She took longer phone calls, sometimes stepping outside, even in the bitter cold. She made excuses to run errands alone, leaving Mary with Kenneth. She started staying up late, claiming she couldn't sleep. One evening, Kenneth tested her. "I'm thinking about working Saturday overtime," he said. "Big job came in. Good money." "Saturday? But that's our family day. Just this once. Unless you're planning to visit your mom again." Sandra hesitated. "I wasn't planning to. But if you're working anyway, maybe you should. Give you a break from baby duty." "Maybe I will." Kenneth nodded and went back to his newspaper. But inside, he was setting another trap that if Sandra left for Bozeman on Saturday, he'd follow her. He'd find out where she really went when she claimed to visit her mother. Because Kenneth was certain of one thing now. Sandra was lying about everything. The question was why she tried to kill their daughter. And whether she'd try again. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with fresh snow dusting the streets of Marrow Creek. Kenneth dressed for work, but didn't drive to the shop. Instead, he parked his truck 3 blocks away and walked back through the alley behind their house. He had a clear view of their driveway from Mrs. Wilker's old garden shed. Eloise Wilker was 87 and spent most of her time watching the neighborhood from her kitchen window. She mentioned seeing people at their house when Kenneth and Sandra were supposedly away. Kenneth waited. At T9:30, Sandra's car backed out of the driveway. Kenneth noted the time and direction she headed. Not toward the highway that led to Bozeman. Toward downtown Marrow Creek. Kenneth jogged back to his truck and followed at a distance. Sandra drove through town and turned on a lake road, heading toward the old fishing cabins on the north shore. Kenneth knew those cabins. Half of them sat empty during winter. The other half were rented by men who came to hunt or fish and wanted privacy. Perfect place for secrets that Sandra's car, pulled into the driveway of cabin number 7. Kenneth parked behind a stand of pine trees and watched through binoculars that a man came out to meet Sandra. Tall, muscular, wearing a tight t-shirt despite the cold. He had the kind of jaw and shoulders that belonged in magazines. Kenneth didn't recognize him. The man pulled Sandra into his arms and kissed her like they'd done it many times before. Kenneth felt something hard and cold settle in his chest. Not surprised he'd suspected this, but confirmation still hit like a physical blow. He took photos with his phone's camera, zooming in on their faces. The man's truck had out-of-state plates. Wyoming. Kenneth memorized the license number. Sandra and the man went inside the cabin. Kenneth waited, camera ready. After 30 minutes, they emerged and sat on the cabin's front porch despite the cold. Kenneth couldn't hear their words, but he could read body language. Sandra was upset, gesturing with her hands. The man was calm, reassuring. Kenneth activated the voice recording app on his phone and crept closer through the trees. The wind carried fragments of conversation. Told you it would work, the man was saying. But he found her too early, Sandra replied. Kenneth always comes home exactly at 9:15. Except that night, he worked late. So we try again. Clayton, I can't. You didn't see her in that hospital. She looked so small. Clayton. Now, Kenneth had a name. You said you wanted out, Clayton continued. You said you couldn't take being a mother anymore. This is the only way. But if the power had gone out like we planned, it would have looked like an accident. I know, but your husband's not stupid. He's going to start asking questions. Sandra's voice dropped to a whisper. Kenneth strained to hear. I'm scared. What if he knows? He doesn't know anything. You said he was calm at the hospital. If he suspected you, he would have confronted you by now. Kenneth almost smiled grimly. They had no idea how wrong they were. I just need more time, Sandra said. Time for what? The longer we wait, the more suspicious it looks. You need to end this. In what? Your marriage. Your life here. Take the insurance money and come with me to Wyoming. Insurance money. Kenneth's gut clenched. Sandra had taken out a life insurance policy on Mary 6 months ago. Said it was responsible parenting. Kenneth hadn't questioned it at the time. Now he understood. Sandra hadn't just tried to kill their daughter. She'd planned to profit from it. Kenneth recorded for another 10 minutes, capturing enough conversation to prove Sandra's guilt. Then he crept back to his truck and drove home. The house felt different now that Kenneth knew the truth. Every room held evidence of Sandra's deception. Her laptop, which she claimed she used for online shopping, probably contained emails with Clayton. Her car would have his fingerprints, his DNA. Kenneth fed Mary her afternoon bottle while his mind worked through the evidence he needed to gather. First, financial records. He went through Sandra's purse while she was still at the cabin, photographing bank statements and credit card bills. Several charges at motels near Marrow Creek. Cash withdrawals on days she claimed to be visiting her mother. Second, phone records. Kenneth called their wireless provider and requested detailed billing statements. The customer service representative tried to explain he needed Sandra's permission to access her individual call logs. She's my wife, Kenneth said. We share the account. I understand, sir, but privacy regulations require consent from the primary user of each line. Kenneth hung up frustrated, but not defeated. He'd find another way. Third, the garage door logs. Kenneth downloaded the complete history from their smart garage system, going back 6 months. The pattern was clear once he knew what to look for. Sandra had been sneaking out at night for weeks, always between midnight and 4 a.m. Kenneth printed the logs and highlighted the suspicious activity with a yellow marker. Fourth, Mary's baby monitor. Someone had disabled the camera the night Sandra put Mary in the freezer. Kenneth checked the device's internal memory and found the deactivation command had come from Sandra's phone at 1:47 a.m. Perfect timing. Disable the camera, then use the garage to access the freezer without being recorded. Kenneth created a file folder and labeled it evidence. Inside, he placed the garage door logs, the baby monitor data, the photos of Sandra with Clayton, and the voice recording of their conversation. But he needed more. In court, a defense attorney would argue the photos proved adultery, not attempted murder. The voice recording was damning, but incomplete. Kenneth needed Sandra to confess in detail, on camera. That evening, Sandra came home with groceries and a guilty expression. How was work? She asked, unpacking milk and bread. Good. Made decent money on the Saturday overtime. That's great. Kenneth studied his wife as she moved around the kitchen. She looked older somehow, worn down by secrets and guilt. How was your mother? Kenneth asked, Sandra's hands stilled on a box of cereal. Fine. She asked about Mary. Tell her anything interesting, just normal grandmother stuff. You know how she is. Kenneth knew how Sandra's mother was. Direct, nosy, and incapable of keeping conversations short. If Sandra had really spent 6 hours in Bozeman, she'd have stories to tell. Did you drive straight there and back? Yes. What? Your car's odometer shows 53 miles. Bozeman is 78 miles each way. Sandra blinked. Kenneth was lying, he hadn't checked the odometer. But Sandra's reaction told him everything. I stopped for gas. Where? The truck stop on Highway 12. That's not on the way to Bozeman. Sandra's face flushed. Kenneth, why are you interrogating me? I visited my mother. I bought groceries. I came home to my family. I'm not interrogating you. I'm just trying to understand your day. Well, stop. It's weird. Sandra left the kitchen, and Kenneth heard her moving around upstairs. Probably calling Clade in to tell him about the questions. Kenneth finished putting away groceries and checked on Mary, who was napping in her swing. His daughter looked peaceful and innocent, unaware that one parent wanted her dead and the other was building a case to save her life. That night, Kenneth lay awake listening to Sandra's breathing. She was pretending to sleep, but her rhythm was wrong. Too controlled. Around midnight, Sandra slipped out of bed. Kenneth kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady. Sandra tiptoed to the bathroom, and Kenneth heard the faint sound of a text message being sent. When Sandra returned to bed, Kenneth waited 20 minutes, then got up and checked the security cameras from his phone. Sandra had indeed gone only to the bathroom, but the timing suggested she'd been texting Clade in when she thought Kenneth was asleep. Kenneth was learning Sandra's patterns, her tells, her weaknesses. Soon he'd have enough evidence to ensure she never got near Mary again. But first, he needed to test the reach of Sandra's deception. Sunday morning, Kenneth suggested they visit Eloise Wilker, their elderly neighbor. She's been worried about us since the incident with Mary, Kenneth said. Might be nice to let her see that Mary's okay. Sandra agreed, reluctantly. She couldn't refuse without seeming heartless. Eloise Wilker opened her door wearing a flour-dusted apron and a sharp expression. At 87, she was still spry and observant, with the kind of memory that made her dangerous to people with secrets. Kenneth, Sandra, and little Mary. Eloise ushered them into her warm kitchen, which smelled like cinnamon rolls and coffee. I've been so worried about you folks. We wanted to thank you, Kenneth said, settling Mary on his lap while Sandra remained standing near the door. Your call to 911 that night helped save precious time. Eloise looked confused. My call? Kenneth, I didn't call 911. You did. I meant your call to the hospital. Checking on Mary. I didn't call the hospital either, dear. Kenneth pretended to be confused while watching Sandra's face go pale. I thought you said you'd spoken to someone about Mary's condition. Oh, that. Eloise waved her hand. I spoke to that young man, the one with the jawline and gym shorts. He told me Mary would be fine. Kenneth felt his pulse quicken. What young man? The one who's been visiting Sandra. Handsome fellow, drives that big truck with the out-of-state plates. Sandra made a small, choking sound. He was here that morning after Mary went to the hospital. Eloise continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. Said he was a friend of the family. Very polite. Assured me little Mary was going to be just fine. Kenneth turned to Sandra. Did you know someone came by to check on us? I know. I don't know who she's talking about. Tall fellow. Eloise said helpfully. About your age, Kenneth. Sandra left with him in his truck. I saw them from my window. When was this? Kenneth asked. Tuesday morning. Sandra came back about an hour later. Tuesday morning. The day after Mary came home from the hospital. Sandra had claimed she was running errands. Mrs. Wilker, Sandra said, her voice tight. I think you might be confused. I didn't go anywhere with anyone on Tuesday. Eloise's eyes sharpened. Dear, I may be old, but my eyes work fine. I watched you get into that truck with a man. You were wearing your blue coat and those white sneakers. Sandra was indeed wearing white sneakers today. Kenneth doubted it was a coincidence. Well, Sandra said, forcing a laugh. Maybe I did accept a ride to the store. I don't remember every little detail from that difficult week. Of course not, Eloise said kindly. Trauma affects memory. But the young man seemed very concerned about Mary. Asked specific questions about her recovery time, whether there would be lasting effects. Kenneth filed away that detail. Clayton had been gathering information about Mary's condition, probably to help Sandra plan their next move. They left Eloise's house with a plate of cinnamon rolls and much more intelligence than Sandra realized she'd revealed. Nice visit, Kenneth said as they walked home. Mrs. Wilker is getting confused in her old age, Sandra replied quickly. Half of what she said didn't make sense. She seemed pretty sharp to me. Kenneth, I didn't go anywhere with a strange man. Why would I do that? I don't know. Why would you? Sandra didn't answer, but Kenneth saw her jaw clench. That afternoon, while Sandra napped and Mary played in her swing, Kenneth drove back to the fishing cabins. Clayton's truck was still parked at cabin 7. Kenneth knocked on the door. Footsteps inside. Then the door opened to reveal the man from the photos. Up close, Clayton looked younger than Kenneth had expected. Maybe 30, with the kind of muscles that came from gyms, not work. Help you? Clayton asked. I'm looking for my wife. Clayton's face went carefully blank. I think you've got the wrong place, friend. Sandra Creed. 5'6", brown hair, drives a silver Honda. Don't know anyone by that name. Kenneth pulled out his phone and showed Clayton one of the photos he'd taken yesterday. Clayton and Sandra kissing on the cabin porch. How about now? Clayton's hand tightened on the door frame. You need to leave. I need to talk to Sandra. She's not here. Then I'll wait. Kenneth pushed past Clayton into the cabin. The space was small but tidy, with a couch, kitchenette, and bedroom visible through an open door. Women's clothing was scattered on the bedroom floor. Get out of my cabin, Clayton said. Nice place. You rent it by the week or the month. I said get out. Kenneth turned to face Clayton directly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down and tell me exactly what you and my wife have been planning. Or I'm going to call the sheriff and show him these photos along with evidence that Sandra tried to kill our 6-month-old daughter. Clayton's aggressive posture faltered. Kill? What are you talking about? She put Mary in a freezer. Left her there to die. I have proof. That's crazy. Sandra loves that kid. Sandra loves you. And she loves the life insurance money she'll collect when Mary dies. Kenneth watched Clayton's face carefully. The man looked genuinely shocked, which meant either he was a good actor or Sandra had lied to him about her motives. Insurance money, Clayton said slowly. $50,000. Sandra took out the policy 6 months ago. Clayton sat down heavily on the couch. She told me she wanted a divorce. Said she was unhappy, felt trapped. She never said anything about hurting the baby. What did she say about getting free? That she needed to make it look like your fault, like you were an unfit father, so she could get custody and move away. Kenneth studied Clayton's expression. The man seemed to be telling the truth, but that didn't make him innocent. What about the power outage? Clayton's eyes widened. How do you know about that? I recorded your conversation yesterday. Jesus. Clayton ran his hands through his hair. This is bad. This is really bad. What power outage, Clayton? Sandra said. She said the freezer might malfunction if the power went out. Said it would look like an accident if the baby was in there when it happened. You helped her plan this. No, I thought she was talking hypothetically, like a worst-case scenario thing. I didn't know she was actually going to. Clayton trailed off, realizing he'd just confessed a conspiracy. Here's what you're going to do, Kenneth said. You're going to keep acting normal around Sandra. Don't tell her we talked. Don't change your behavior. And when I need you to, you're going to testify about everything she told you. And if I refuse, Kenneth pulled out his phone and showed Clayton the voice recording from yesterday. Then I'll give this to the police and tell them you were the mastermind behind an attempted infanticide. Jury will love hearing how the strong young man manipulated the vulnerable new mother. Clayton paled. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter what actually happened. Matters what I can prove. Kenneth stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing. Sandra's going to try again. When she does, you're going to call me immediately. You understand? Clayton nodded miserably. Kenneth drove home satisfied that he gained a potential witness and neutralized a threat. Claydon was weak, selfish, and cowardly, exactly the kind of man who would betray Sandra to save himself when the pressure mounted. Sandra was awake when Kenneth returned, feeding Mary in the kitchen. "Where did you go?" she asked. "Hardware store. Needed screws for the baby gates." "What baby gates?" "I'm installing safety gates throughout the house. Top of stairs, basement door, garage entrance." Sandra's spoon paused halfway to Mary's mouth. "Why?" "To keep Mary safe. Can't be too careful after what happened. Kenneth, she's 6 months old. She can barely sit up by herself. Better to install them now than wait until she's mobile." Kenneth watched Sandra's reaction. She looked worried, but not about Mary's safety. She was worried about her own access to the garage. "Maybe we don't need the garage gate," Sandra said carefully. "We always keep that door locked anyway. Especially needed on the garage. That's where the danger is." Sandra said nothing, but Kenneth could see her mind working. He was making it harder for her to repeat her previous attempt. That night, Kenneth installed motion sensor lights in the garage and tested them with his phone. Any movement in the space would trigger bright illumination and send an alert to his device. Sandra watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "Seems like overkill," she said. "Seems like protection. For Mary or for you." Kenneth looked up from the light he was mounting. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. You've just been different since the hospital. Suspicious. Like you don't trust me. Do you think I should trust you?" Sandra's eyes flashed. "I'm your wife, the mother of your child." "Yes, you are." Kenneth went back to his work, but he could feel Sandra watching him. She was getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Kenneth was counting on it. Monday morning, Kenneth called in sick to work and drove to Billings to meet with attorney Rebecca Nash. A family law specialist who'd been recommended by his Army buddy Jake Torres. Nash's office was clean and professional, with degrees on the wall and family photos on her desk. She listened while Kenneth explained the situation, taking notes and asking sharp questions. "You have compelling evidence," Nash said when Kenneth finished. "But it's mostly circumstantial. A prosecutor would want more before filing charges." "What kind of more?" "A confession. Video evidence of another attempt. Financial records showing motive beyond the insurance policy." Kenneth pulled out his phone and played the recording of Sandra and Claydon at the cabin. Nash listened intently, then asked to hear it again. "This is better," she said. "Clear admission of guilt. But it's still not enough for criminal charges. However, it's absolutely enough for emergency custody." "Explain that." "We file a motion claiming Mary is in immediate danger. With this evidence, a judge will grant temporary custody to you while Child Protective Services investigates." "How long does that take?" "Could be weeks or months. But it protects Mary while you gather more evidence." Kenneth felt relief wash over him. "Do it." Nash began preparing the paperwork immediately. While she worked, Kenneth called his sister Marla. "I need to tell you something," Kenneth said, "and I need your help." He explained everything he discovered. Marla listened without interrupting, but Kenneth could hear her sharp intake of breath when he played the recording. "That evil witch," Marla said. "Kenneth, we have to stop her." "I'm trying, but I need medical documentation about Mary's condition that night." "I can get that. I still have contacts at the hospital." "Can you do it quietly?" "Of course." "What else do you need?" "Someone to watch Mary when this gets messy. Sandra's going to be arrested eventually. She's coming home with me the minute you say the word." Kenneth felt grateful for his sister's loyalty. Marla had always been protective of family, and she loved Mary like her own daughter. "One more thing," Kenneth said. "I need you to document everything you observed about Sandra's behavior after Mary was born. The postpartum issues. Was it really postpartum depression, or was it something else?" Marla was quiet for a moment. Looking back, it seemed more like resentment than depression. She acted like Mary was an inconvenience, not a blessing. "Will you write that down?" "Officially, absolutely." Kenneth returned to Nash's office that afternoon to sign the custody paperwork. The motion would be filed first thing Tuesday morning. "What happens when Sandra finds out?" Kenneth asked. "She'll be served with papers and have a chance to respond. But given the evidence, I'm confident the judge will side with you." Kenneth drove home planning his next moves. He needed to prepare for Sandra's reaction to losing custody. She'd either confess everything in a panic or escalate her attempts to harm Mary. Either way, Kenneth would be ready. That evening, Sandra seemed nervous again. She kept checking her phone and glancing at Kenneth when she thought he wasn't looking. "Everything okay?" Kenneth asked during dinner. "Fine. Just tired. Maybe you should visit your mother again. Take a break." Sandra's fork paused over her salad. "Why do you keep suggesting that? You seem stressed lately. A change of scenery might help. I don't want to leave Mary right now. After what happened, Mary would be safe with me." "Of course she would. I didn't mean, I just want to be here." Kenneth nodded and changed the subject, but he noted Sandra's reaction. She didn't want to leave town, which suggested she was planning something that required her to stay close to Mary. After dinner, Kenneth tested the new garage motion sensors while Sandra bathed Mary. The lights activated instantly when he entered the space, and his phone buzzed with an alert. Perfect. He also checked the baby monitor, which was now recording continuously to cloud storage. Sandra couldn't disable it without Kenneth knowing immediately. When Kenneth came back inside, he found Sandra standing in Mary's room, looking down at their daughter with an expression he couldn't read. "She's beautiful," Sandra said softly. "Yes, she is. Sometimes I wonder what kind of life she'll have." "What do you mean?" Sandra turned to face Kenneth. "Do you think we're good parents?" The question felt like a trap. "I think we're learning." "Do you think Mary will be happy?" "I think Mary will be loved and protected." Sandra studied Kenneth's face. "You sound like you're making a promise." "I am." That night, Kenneth lay awake listening for sounds from Mary's room. The motion sensors would alert him if Sandra entered the garage, and the baby monitor would show any activity in Mary's room. But Sandra didn't move. She lay still beside Kenneth, breathing steadily, apparently asleep. At 3 a.m., Kenneth's phone buzzed. Motion detected in garage. Kenneth slipped out of bed and checked the live camera feed. The garage was empty, but the motion sensor showed recent activity. Kenneth crept downstairs and found the garage door slightly ajar. He looked outside and saw Sandra's car, missing from the driveway. She'd left through the garage, but somehow avoided triggering the camera. Kenneth realized she must have crawled under the sensor's range, staying low to avoid detection. Kenneth checked Mary's room. Empty crib, his blood turned to ice. Sandra had taken Mary with her. Kenneth grabbed his keys and phone, then remembered the tracking app he'd installed on Sandra's car last week. He pulled up the location, the fishing cabins. Kenneth drove through the night toward the lake, his mind racing through terrible possibilities. Was Sandra planning to kill Mary at the cabin? Make it look like an accident far from home? Or was she running, planning to disappear with their daughter? Either way, Kenneth was done playing games. Tonight, everything would end. Kenneth reached the fishing cabins at 3:47 a.m., his truck's tires crunching on the gravel road. Cabin 7 showed lights in the windows, and Sandra's car sat in the driveway next to Clayton's truck. Kenneth parked in the trees and approached on foot, checking his phone to make sure the voice recording app was active. He needed to hear what Sandra was planning. Voices carried through the thin cabin walls. "Can't stay here," Clayton was saying. "He's going to call the police." "He doesn't know anything," Sandra replied. "We stick to the plan." "What plan?" "You said you were getting a divorce, not kidnapping your own kid." "I'm not kidnapping her. I'm her mother." Kenneth crept closer to the window and peered inside. Sandra sat on the couch, holding Mary, who was sleeping peacefully. Clayton paced near the kitchenette, looking agitated. "Sandra, this is crazy. Take the baby home." "I can't go home." Kenneth's suspicious. He's been asking questions, installing cameras. "So answer his questions. Act normal." "I can't act normal anymore." Sandra's voice cracked. "Every time I look at her, I remember how trapped I feel, how much I want my old life back." Kenneth felt his jaw clench. Sandra was talking about Mary like she was a burden instead of a daughter. "Then get divorced," Clayton said. "Do it legally. And give up half of everything." Kenneth makes good money. The house, his truck, the shop, I'd lose all of that. So this is about money. It's about freedom. And yes, money helps you be free. Clayton stopped pacing and stared at Sandra. "Jesus, you really did try to kill her." "I tried to solve a problem. She's your daughter. She's a mistake I can't undo." Kenneth had heard enough. He pulled out his phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" This is Kenneth Creed. I need officers at the fishing cabins on Lake Road. Cabin 7. My wife has kidnapped our infant daughter. Sir, can you confirm your location? Kenneth gave the address and explained the situation quickly. The dispatcher promised units were on the way. Kenneth hung up and called Clayton's number, which he'd saved from yesterday's conversation. Clayton's phone rang inside the cabin. Hello, this is Kenneth. I'm outside the cabin. Clayton went to the window and looked out, his face pale in the lamplight. Bring me my daughter, Kenneth said. Now, Kenneth, we're just talking. Nobody's hurt. Bring her out, or I'm coming in. Kenneth could see Clayton looking at Sandra, who was shaking her head frantically. She doesn't want to see you right now, Clayton said. I don't care what she wants. I care about Mary. Kenneth ended the call and approached the cabin door. Through the window, he saw Sandra whispering urgently to Clayton while Mary stirred in her arms. Kenneth knocked on the door. Sandra, open up. No response. Kenneth tried the handle. Locked. Sandra, the police are on their way. Don't make this worse than it already is. The door opened, and Clayton appeared looking defeated. She's in here. Kenneth pushed past him and found Sandra sitting on the couch, clutching Mary like a shield. Give me my daughter, Kenneth said. She's my daughter too. You tried to kill her. I never. That's not what happened. I have recordings, Sandra, of you admitting you put Mary in the freezer. Sandra's face crumpled. Kenneth, please. Let me explain. Explain to the police. Kenneth reached for Mary, but Sandra pulled back. Don't take her from me. You took her from me first. I'm her mother. No, Kenneth said, his voice hard. Mothers don't put their babies in freezers. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Sandra heard them and began crying. Please, Kenneth. I made a mistake. I was confused, depressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to plan it with him. Kenneth nodded toward Clayton. I never planned anything, Clayton protested. She told me she wanted a divorce. Shut up, Sandra snapped. The police arrived with flashing lights and loud voices. 3 officers approached the cabin while Kenneth stood in the doorway, holding Mary. Mr. Creed, the lead officer was a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes. I'm Sergeant Lopez. Are you and the baby okay? We're fine now. Ma'am, I need you to step outside, Lopez said to Sandra. I haven't done anything wrong. We'll sort that out. Right now, I need everyone outside where we can talk safely. 20 minutes later, Sandra sat in the back of a police car while Kenneth gave his statement to Sergeant Lopez. He showed her the photos, played the recordings, and explained about finding Mary in the freezer. This is a complex domestic situation, Lopez said. We'll need to involve Child Protective Services and the district attorney's office. What happens to Sandra depends on what the DA decides to charge her with. Could be child endangerment, could be attempted murder. Kenneth nodded. What about him? He gestured toward Clayton, who was giving his own statement to another officer. Accessory charges, possibly. Again, up to the DA. Kenneth held Mary close, feeling her warm weight against his chest. She was safe now. Finally safe. The next morning, Deputy District Attorney Laurel Shaw called Kenneth at home. Mr. Creed, I've reviewed the evidence you provided to Sergeant Lopez. I'd like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss charges. Shaw's office was in the courthouse, a small building that served 3 rural counties. She was younger than Kenneth had expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Your wife is currently being held on charges of child endangerment and kidnapping, Shaw said. But after reviewing your evidence, I think we can do better. What do you mean? Attempted murder. Your recordings prove premeditation. The insurance policy establishes a financial motive. The physical evidence shows she deliberately placed your daughter in a life-threatening situation. Kenneth felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. Can you make it stick? With your cooperation, yes. But I need you to understand what this means. Your wife will likely spend the next 20 years in prison. Good. Shaw studied Kenneth's face. You're certain about this? No possibility of reconciliation. She tried to kill my daughter for insurance money. There's no coming back from that. Shaw nodded and opened a thick file. Then let's talk about how we're going to prove it. Sandra's arraignment was held the following Thursday. Kenneth sat in the gallery with Marla, watching his wife stand before Judge Harrison in an orange jumpsuit. Mrs. Creed, you're charged with attempted murder in the first degree, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping, Judge Harrison read. How do you plead? Sandra's public defender, a tired-looking man named Phillips, spoke for her. Not guilty, Your Honor. Bail is set at $500,000. Trial date is set for March 15th. Kenneth felt satisfaction wash over him. Sandra couldn't make bail, which meant she'd stay in jail until trial. Mary would be safe. Outside the courthouse, Phillips approached Kenneth. Mr. Creed, my client would like to discuss a plea agreement. Talk to the DA. She wants to apologize to you personally. Kenneth turned to face the lawyer. Tell your client that if she'd wanted to apologize, she shouldn't have tried to murder my daughter. She maintains her innocence regarding attempted murder. She admits to poor judgment and temporary mental instability. She admits to putting a 6-month-old baby in a freezer and leaving her there to die. Phillips looked uncomfortable. Postpartum depression can cause severe, save it for the jury. Kenneth walked away, Marla beside him. How are you holding up? Marla asked. Better now that she's locked up. What about Mary? She's perfect, happy. She doesn't know how close she came to losing everything. Over the next few weeks, Kenneth worked closely with DA Shaw to prepare for trial. They organized the evidence, lined up witnesses, and planned their strategy. Clayton Rowe has agreed to testify against your wife in exchange for a reduced sentence, Shaw told Kenneth during one of their meetings. What kind of reduced sentence? 5 years instead of 15. He'll serve time for conspiracy and accessory charges, but nothing close to what Sandra's facing. Kenneth wasn't entirely satisfied with the deal, but he understood the necessity. Clayton's testimony would seal Sandra's fate. Meanwhile, Kenneth took full custody of Mary and settled into single parenthood. Marla helped during the day while Kenneth worked at the shop. Evenings were for feeding Mary, playing with her, and marveling at how much she'd grown. Mary had no memory of that night in the freezer. To her, Kenneth was simply the parent who was always there, always attentive, always protective. The trial began on a cold March morning. Kenneth wore his best suit and sat in the front row as potential jurors were questioned. Shaw wanted people with children, people who would understand the gravity of Sandra's crime. Sandra looked different at the defense table. Thinner, older, with dark circles under her eyes. Prison didn't agree with her. During opening statements, Shaw painted a clear picture of premeditation and greed. Sandra Creed didn't snap under the pressure of new motherhood, Shaw told the jury. She planned the murder of her 6-month-old daughter for financial gain. She took out a life insurance policy, arranged for an alibi, and deliberately placed Mary Creed in a freezer to die. Phillips, the defense attorney, tried to argue mental illness. My client was suffering from severe postpartum depression, a condition that affects thousands of new mothers. She was not thinking clearly, not acting rationally. This was a cry for help, not a calculated murder. Kenneth listened to both arguments, but only one rang true. Sandra had been calculating from the beginning. The prosecution's case unfolded over 6 days, with Kenneth as the star witness. Shaw led him through his testimony carefully, establishing the timeline of events and Kenneth's growing suspicions about Sandra's behavior. When you found Mary in the freezer, what was your first thought? Shaw asked. That I might be too late. That I might lose her. Did you suspect your wife at that time? No. I thought someone had broken in. When did that change? Kenneth looked directly at the jury. When Sandra said she'd told me Mary would be okay. She knew Mary was alive before I told her. Phillips tried to poke holes in Kenneth's testimony during cross-examination. Mr. Creed, isn't it true that you installed surveillance equipment to spy on your wife? I installed security equipment to protect my daughter. You recorded private conversations without consent. I recorded evidence of a crime. You followed your wife and took photographs of her personal activities. I followed a suspect and documented her meeting with a co-conspirator. Phillips made Sandra sound like a victim of Kenneth's paranoia, but Kenneth remained calm and factual. The evidence spoke for itself. Dr. Martinez testified about Mary's condition when she arrived at the hospital. The infant's core temperature was dangerously low. Another 10 to 15 minutes of exposure could have been fatal. In your medical opinion, could this have been accidental? No. The freezer was functioning normally. Someone placed the child inside and closed the lid. Eloise Wilker testified about seeing Sandra with Claydin, providing crucial evidence about the affair and conspiracy. She left with that young man several times, always when her husband was at work. Marla testified about Sandra's behavior after Mary's birth. She seemed resentful rather than depressed, like Mary was an inconvenience instead of a blessing. The garage door logs, the baby monitor data, and the financial records all painted a picture of calculation and planning. But the most damaging testimony came from Claydin himself. He took the stand looking nervous and ashamed, avoiding eye contact with Sandra. She asked me if a freezer death would look natural. Claydin testified, said if the power went out, it would seem like an accident. Did you understand what she was planning? Not at first. I thought she was speaking hypothetically. When did you realize she was serious? When she called me after putting the baby in the freezer. She was panicked because her husband found the baby too quickly. What did she say exactly? That the plan failed because Kenneth worked late that night. She said next time she'd have to be more careful about timing. Phillips tried to discredit Claydin during cross-examination. You're testifying to save yourself from a longer prison sentence, aren't you? Yes. So the jury should believe you're suddenly telling the truth when it benefits you. I'm telling the truth because it's the right thing to do. That baby could have died. Kenneth watched the jury's faces during Claydin's testimony. Several looked disgusted, others angry. They weren't buying the defense's attempts to paint Claydin as an unreliable witness. Sandra didn't testify on her own behalf. Phillips called expert witnesses about postpartum depression and the effects of mental illness on judgment, but the evidence against Sandra was overwhelming that on the final day of testimony, Shaw called a surprise witness, Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Kenneth hadn't known about this witness, and from Phillips' reaction, neither had the defense. Agent Torres, what did your investigation reveal about the defendant's financial activities? We found evidence of significant debt that Mrs. Creed hid from her husband. Credit cards, personal loans, online gambling. Kenneth felt shock wash over him. Sandra had been gambling. How much debt are we talking about? Approximately $80,000. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Kenneth stared at Sandra, who was whispering frantically with Phillips. Was Mr. Creed aware of this debt? No. Mrs. Creed used a separate mailing address and forged her husband's signature on several loan applications. Shaw introduced bank records showing Sandra's gambling activity over the past year. Thousands of dollars lost on online poker sites, sports betting, and casino apps. In your opinion, would the $50,000 life insurance payout on Mary Creed have helped Mrs. Creed's financial situation? It would have covered most of her immediate debt, yes. Kenneth felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Sandra hadn't just wanted freedom from motherhood. She'd needed money to cover her gambling debts. Phillips objected repeatedly, but the financial evidence was solid. Sandra had been stealing money from their joint accounts to fund her gambling, then taking out loans when that wasn't enough. During closing arguments, Shaw hammered home the motive. Sandra Creed didn't just want to escape motherhood. She needed $50,000 to cover debts her husband knew nothing about. She saw her own daughter as a means to solve her financial problems. Phillips made one last attempt to argue mental illness, but the financial evidence undermined his case. Sandra's gambling showed planning and calculation, not mental breakdown. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. Kenneth closed his eyes and felt relief flood through him. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of child endangerment. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of kidnapping. Sandra collapsed at the defense table, sobbing. Phillips put his arm around her shoulders, but she was inconsolable. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week. Kenneth walked out of the courthouse with Marla, feeling like he could breathe fully for the first time in months. It's over, Marla said. Yes, it is. What now? Kenneth thought about Mary, probably napping at Marla's house under the care of a babysitter. His daughter was safe, Sandra was convicted, and life could finally move forward. Now we go home, Kenneth said, and we start over. 1 year after Sandra's sentencing to 25 years without parole, Kenneth sat in his living room, watching Mary take her first steps at T 18 months. She was curious and fearless, toddling between the couch and coffee table with determination. She had Kenneth's stubborn streak and Sandra's dark eyes, but her personality was entirely her own. Dida. Mary squealed when she reached Kenneth's arms. That's right, baby girl. Daddy's here. Marla watched from the kitchen doorway, smiling. She'd moved in 6 months ago to help with Mary's care, and the arrangement worked perfectly. Mary had a doting aunt, Kenneth had reliable child care, and Marla had the daughter she'd never had. Dinner's ready, Marla announced. They ate as a family, Mary in her high chair making happy messes with mashed vegetables. The conversation was light, focused on Mary's development and Kenneth's plans to expand the auto shop. Nobody mentioned Sandra anymore. She was a closed chapter, a cautionary tale about greed and selfishness that had no place in their peaceful home. After dinner, Kenneth bathed Mary and read her a bedtime story. She fell asleep in his arms, warm and secure and loved. You were left in the cold, Kenneth whispered, stroking her hair. But now you'll never feel it again. Outside, snow began falling on Marrow Creek, blanketing the town in quiet white. Inside, Kenneth's house was warm and bright, filled with laughter and love and the promise of better days ahead. Mary stirred in her sleep and smiled, dreaming whatever dreams happy children dream. Kenneth kissed her forehead and tucked her in, then stood watching her breathe for a long moment. She was safe. Finally, completely safe, and that was all that mattered.